It was a warm spring evening in New Orleans, the kind of night when music floated through the air like perfume. The streets buzzed with laughter, brass bands played on corners, and the annual jazz festival had drawn crowds from every corner of the country. In the middle of all that excitement stood a young woman, clutching a worn trumpet case against her chest. Her hands trembled, not from fear exactly, but from the quiet pressure that came with a dream she had carried for years. She had grown up listening to her father play that same trumpet on the front porch after long days at work. He had never been famous, but to her he was the greatest musician who ever lived. When he passed away, the trumpet became her most treasured memory of him. It wasn't shiny anymore. The brass was faded, the mouthpiece had small dents, and one of the valves stuck from time to time. But every time she played it, she felt him there, guiding her breath, shaping every note. She wasn't a star. Not yet, anyway. She played at small cafes, weddings, and sometimes at the local community center. She wasn't doing it for fame. She just wanted to keep that feeling alive, the one she felt when her father told her, "Don't just play the notes, play your story." That night at the jazz festival, she was invited to perform with a small local band. They weren't on the main stage, just one of the smaller ones near the park's edge where most people came and went without stopping. But she didn't mind. She had her trumpet, her music, and a few friends who believed in her. That was enough. As she warmed up, she could hear the distant roar of the crowd at the main stage. A famous American musician had arrived, a trumpet player known around the world for his fire, his energy, and his confidence. People said he could make his trumpet sing, cry, and laugh all in one breath. His name alone filled venues. Some said he was the best of his generation. When she heard the news that he was coming to the festival, she never imagined their paths would cross. To her, he existed in another world, a world of fame, spotlight, and grand stages. She was just a small-town player who practiced in her kitchen when the world went quiet. But fate has a way of connecting people who share the same heartbeat. It happened after she finished her first short set. She played with heart, her tones soft and tender, the kind of sound that made people stop even when they didn't plan to. Her final piece, a slow tune her father used to love, hung in the air long after she lowered her trumpet. For a moment, the crowd went silent, and then came gentle applause. What she didn't know was that the renowned musician had been walking nearby, quietly listening from the edge of the crowd. He had just finished his own sound check on the main stage and was taking a short break, wandering through the festival to soak up the atmosphere. When he heard her play, he stopped in his tracks. There was something in her tone that felt honest, unpolished but alive. He watched her closely, noticing how she closed her eyes when she played, how her fingers moved gently, as if she was afraid to wake a memory. It reminded him of the early days when he used to play not for fame but for joy. When she finished, he clapped with the crowd and then stepped forward. The young woman looked up, surprised to see the tall man in the black hat and golden trumpet pendant around his neck. She recognized him instantly. Her heart skipped a beat. He was standing right in front of her. "Nice tone," he said with a grin, his voice deep and friendly. "Where'd you learn to play like that?" She hesitated, not sure if he was serious. "Mostly by listening," she said quietly. "My father taught me a little. The rest I just feel," he chuckled. "Feeling's the best teacher there is," the small crowd murmured. People had started to gather, realizing who he was. Cameras came out, phones lifted. Someone whispered, "Is he going to play?" The famous musician looked at her trumpet, then back at her. "How about we have a little fun?" he said with a playful spark in his eyes. "A trumpet duel right here. You and me." She blinked, unsure she heard him right. A duel against him? The crowd erupted in laughter and cheers. Some shouted encouragement, others gasped. It was all so sudden that she didn't know what to do. She smiled nervously. "You're joking, right?" He lifted his trumpet case, opened it slowly, and pulled out his gleaming gold instrument. "Only one way to find out." The band behind her exchanged shocked looks. The crowd grew larger, people hurrying over from nearby stalls. Even the musicians from other stages peeked in, curious about what was happening. The young woman's heart pounded in her chest. She looked down at her old, dented trumpet, and then at his perfect one shining in the lights. For a moment, she wanted to say no. She wasn't ready for this. But then she remembered her father's words. "Play your story." She took a deep breath, adjusted her mouthpiece, and nodded. "All right," she said softly. "Let's play." The crowd cheered wildly. He started first. His opening notes were smooth, fast, and full of energy. The sound filled the night, bold and bright. He danced through complex runs that showed every bit of his skill. The crowd shouted and clapped. His music was powerful. It demanded attention. When he stopped, all eyes turned to her. It was her turn. She felt her hands shake as she lifted the trumpet. The metal felt cold against her lips. She closed her eyes, blocking out the noise, the cameras, the whispers. She thought of her father sitting on that porch, the way he used to close his eyes and smile while playing. Then she played. Her first note wasn't loud, but it was pure. It carried emotion, the kind that made people stop talking. Her melody was simple, a soft tune that rose and fell like a heartbeat. It wasn't about speed or perfection. It was about feeling. As she played, something inside her shifted. The nerves faded and the music took over. When she finished, there was silence, a silence heavier than applause. Then the crowd exploded with cheers. The famous musician laughed in surprise. "Well," he said, lifting his trumpet. "Didn't expect that?" He answered with another round, faster and more daring this time. His notes danced through the air like fireworks. The crowd clapped in rhythm, loving every second. When he ended with a powerful high note, people whistled and shouted his name, but she didn't let that shake her. She smiled faintly and lifted her trumpet again. This time her melody was even softer, a Nestorian sound. It spoke of loss, love, and hope. Every note seemed to carry something real. The crowd swayed with her rhythm. Some closed their eyes. It was no longer a duel. It was a conversation between two souls. By the time she played her final note, even the other musicians stood still. The sound faded slowly into the night, and for a moment no one moved. Then came the loudest applause of the evening. He lowered his trumpet, smiling widely. "You," he said, pointing at her. "You've got something special." She looked at him, unsure what to say. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded and leaned closer. "Don't ever lose that feeling. Technique fades, fame comes and goes, but heart, and that's what lasts." She smiled, still in disbelief. The crowd surrounded them, people congratulating her, asking for photos. But she barely noticed. Her heart was too full. That night, after the festival ended, she sat alone near the river with her trumpet beside her. The lights from the city danced on the water. She replayed everything in her head, his challenge, the cheers, his words. She couldn't quite understand what had happened, only that something inside her had changed. For the first time, she realized she didn't need to prove herself to anyone. Music wasn't about winning or losing. It was about connection, the kind that reaches people without a single word. She looked up at the night sky and whispered, "I did it, Dad." The wind carried her words away, and in that quiet moment she smiled. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, sunlight crept through the small window of her room. She woke up with the trumpet still resting beside her on the table. For a moment she lay still, trying to remember if the night before had really happened. The cheering crowd, the duel, the world-famous musician standing across from her. It all felt like a dream. She sat up slowly and rubbed her eyes. Her phone buzzed with messages and missed calls. Friends, other musicians, even people she hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out. Some sent her short videos from the performance, clips that were already spreading online. One message said, "You're trending." Everyone's talking about the trumpet girl who faced him. She didn't know whether to laugh or panic. It was overwhelming. She had never been the center of attention before. Fame wasn't something she'd ever chased. All she had wanted was to play from her heart, and somehow that simple wish had pulled her into a storm she never asked for. Later that morning, she walked through the streets near the festival grounds. People smiled at her, some even stopped to shake her hand or take pictures. A few kids ran up to her asking about the duel. One little boy held a toy trumpet and said shyly, "I want to play like you when I grow up." She bent down, smiling gently. "Then promise me you'll play every day. Not for anyone else, just for yourself." He nodded eagerly and she felt her heart warm. But fame is a strange thing. While some praised her, others were less kind. She overheard a few musicians saying the famous player had let her win to create a moment for the crowd. Others said it was just a publicity stunt. Their words stung, but she tried not to let them sink in. Deep down, she knew the truth. What had happened wasn't planned. It was pure music born from two souls speaking through sound. That evening she went back to the small cafe where she often performed. It felt comforting to return to something simple, something real. The owner, an older man with kind eyes, greeted her with a big smile. "Our local star returns," he said, handing her a cup of coffee. "You made this whole town proud last night," she laughed softly. "I just played. That's all," he shook his head. "No, you reminded people why music matters. That's something rare." As she took a sip, her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a text or social media alert. It was a call from an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A deep, familiar voice spoke on the other end. "Hope I'm not interrupting your coffee," the man said with a warm chuckle. It was him, the famous musician from last night. Her eyes widened. "Oh, hello." "No, you're not interrupting at all. I just wanted to say," he continued, "you played beautifully. I meant what I said. You reminded me why I started doing this." She smiled, still unsure what to say. "That means a lot. I really didn't expect any of it. I thought you were joking when you challenged me," he laughed. "I was, at least at first. But when you started playing, I realized it wasn't a joke anymore. You've got something special. Don't lose it," she thanked him quietly. There was a pause on the line before he added, "I'm performing again tonight. Main stage. You should come." Her breath caught for a moment. "To watch?" she asked. "To play," he said. "Come and join us for a number." No pressure, just music. She froze. The cafe around her seemed to disappear. I don't know if I can," she said. "That's a big stage." He spoke softly, like a teacher guiding a student. "Music doesn't care about big or small. It just wants to be heard. Think about it. If you decide to come, you know where to find us." The line went quiet. She sat there, staring at her cup. Her hands trembled slightly, just like they had before the duel. Part of her wanted to say no, to stay where it was safe. But another part, the same one that made her lift her trumpet that night, whispered, "Maybe it's time." She looked at the trumpet resting on the chair beside her. It was old and worn, but somehow it seemed to be waiting for her answer. That night, the main stage was packed. Bright lights, huge speakers, cameras, everything felt larger than life. The crowd buzzed with excitement, waiting for the performance to begin. Backstage, she stood holding her trumpet, trying to steady her breathing. The famous musician spotted her and walked over with a grin. "You came," he said. "I almost didn't," she admitted, "but I figured I'd regret it if I didn't try." "That's the spirit." He gently patted her shoulder. "Don't overthink it. Just play." As the band started tuning up, he turned to her and whispered, "We'll start with something familiar. Follow my lead, and when it's your turn, make it yours." The lights dimmed. The crowd roared. The music began. The opening melody was upbeat, full of rhythm and life. He led the band with his trumpet, his sound bold and confident. Then halfway through the song, he nodded to her. It was her turn. She lifted her trumpet and stepped forward. The spotlight hit her face, and for a split second she couldn't see anything but white light. Then she played. The notes came softly at first, almost shy, but then they grew stronger, warmer. She didn't think about the cameras or the crowd. She just played what she felt. Her joy, her fear, her memories. The band followed her lead, building around her melody. The famous musician smiled as he listened, his eyes shining. He joined in, harmonizing with her notes. Their sounds blended together perfectly, like two voices telling one story. When the song ended, the crowd exploded with applause. People stood up, cheering, clapping, shouting her name. She lowered her trumpet, breathing hard but smiling from ear to ear. After the show, backstage was alive with energy. Musicians congratulated her. Stagehands clapped her on the back, and the famous player handed her a bottle of water. "You did good," he said simply. She laughed nervously. "I was shaking the whole time." "Good," he replied with a grin. "Means you still care." They sat together for a while after the crowd left. He told her stories about his early days, playing in small bars, sleeping in buses, getting booed off stage, and still going back the next night. She listened carefully, hanging on every word. At one point she asked, "Do you ever get tired of it? The pressure, the fame, the travel?" He looked thoughtful. "Sometimes. But then I hear someone like you, and I remember why I fell in love with it in the first place. Music's not a career, it's a conversation that never ends." Those words stayed with her. Long after she went home, she kept thinking about them. She replayed the night in her mind. The lights, the sound, the feeling of standing next to someone she had admired for years. The next morning, her social media was flooded again. Videos of her performance had gone viral. Headlines appeared online. Unknown trumpet player steals the show at jazz festival. She smiled at the messages, but deep down she still felt the same. She wasn't chasing fame. She just wanted to keep playing, to keep learning, to keep that connection alive. Later that week she received another call, this time not from the musician himself, but from his manager. The woman on the phone sounded formal but kind. "He's putting together a short tour," she explained. "He wants to invite you to join him for a few shows as a guest performer. Would you be interested?" For a moment she couldn't breathe. A tour with him? It sounded like something out of a dream. I need some time to think," she said softly. "Of course," the manager replied. "Take your time. He said to tell you there's no rush, just follow your heart." After the call ended, she sat quietly, staring at her trumpet. It was as if life had opened a door she never even knew existed. She thought about her father, about how proud he would have been. The next day, she walked back to the river where she had sat after the duel. The water shimmered under the afternoon sun. She lifted her trumpet and played a slow, gentle tune, the same one her father used to love. As the sound echoed softly across the water, she smiled. Maybe she didn't know where this road would lead. Maybe it would be hard, but for the first time she wasn't afraid. She had found her voice, and that voice was finally being heard. Days passed after that phone call, but her mind wouldn't settle. The idea of joining a tour felt exciting yet terrifying at the same time. She wasn't used to big crowds or bright lights. She had always been the kind of person who played for the feeling, not for attention. But something deep inside told her this was more than just an opportunity. It was a chance to grow, to see how far her love for music could take her. She sat by her window one evening watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Her trumpet rested on her lap. She ran her fingers along the smooth metal, thinking about how far she'd come, from small cafes and street corners to standing beside one of the most respected musicians in the world. It all felt unreal. Her phone buzzed again. It was a message from the same manager who had called earlier. "We'll be rehearsing this weekend in New York. The invitation still stands." She stared at the message for a long time before replying with a single line. "I'll be there." The next morning, she packed her trumpet carefully and boarded a bus heading north. It was a long ride, but she didn't mind. Watching the scenery roll by, fields, towns, bridges, she thought about her father again. She could almost hear his voice telling her to stay true to herself no matter what. That thought gave her courage. When she arrived in New York, the city felt like another world, and loud, fast, and full of energy. She followed the directions to a large studio where the band was rehearsing. The moment she stepped inside, she heard music echoing through the room. Trumpets, saxophones, drums, bass, everything blending in perfect rhythm. The famous musician stood in the center, leading the group. When he saw her walk in, he grinned. "You made it," he said warmly. She nodded, trying to hide how nervous she felt. "I hope I'm not too late." "Right on time," he said. "Grab your horn. Let's make some music." The band welcomed her kindly. They practiced a few classic jazz numbers, and though she fumbled a few notes at first, everyone encouraged her. The musician kept glancing her way, offering small nods of approval whenever she found her rhythm. By the end of the day, her nerves had melted away. It wasn't about proving herself. It was about being part of something bigger. During a break, they sat together at a small table near the stage. "How are you feeling?" he asked. She smiled. "Overwhelmed, but in a good way," he nodded. "That's normal. The first time I toured, I was terrified. I messed up more times than I can count. But you know what? People don't remember your mistakes. They remember your honesty." That's what they felt that night back at the festival. Don't ever lose that. His words stuck with her. She didn't want to be the best. She just wanted to be real. When rehearsal ended, she walked through the city streets with her trumpet case swinging at her side. The sounds of New York filled the air. Horns, footsteps, laughter, street performers playing on corners. She stopped for a moment to listen to a young man playing the saxophone near a subway entrance. His music was rough but full of emotion. She smiled, dropped a few dollars into his case, and kept walking. That night, back in her small hotel room, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake thinking about the tour ahead. There would be new cities, new faces, new stages. But most of all, there would be music, the one thing that always made her feel alive. The tour began 2 weeks later. Their first show was in Chicago. She stood backstage listening to the roar of the crowd. It was much bigger than anything she had ever seen. Thousands of people waiting, cheering, clapping. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the music starting. The band took the stage first, followed by the famous musician. The lights flashed, the drums kicked in, and the audience went wild. He led with his trumpet, filling the air with that unmistakable golden sound. Then halfway through the song, he looked back and motioned to her. Her stomach tightened. This was it, her moment. She took a deep breath, stepped into the spotlight, and lifted her trumpet. The noise of the crowd faded away. It was just her, the stage, and the music. Her first note was soft, trembling slightly, but then it grew stronger. She played with feeling, letting every emotion pour out. The audience fell silent as she played. Even the other musicians seemed to pause for a moment. When she finished her solo, the crowd erupted with cheers. She lowered her trumpet, breathing hard, her hands shaking. The famous musician smiled at her and whispered, "You did it." After the show, the band gathered backstage, laughing and celebrating. The energy was electric. Someone brought out food. Others told stories from the road. She sat quietly in the corner, soaking it all in. She felt like she belonged. As the night went on, the musician walked over and sat beside her. "You know," he said, "I've seen a lot of players come and go. Most are good. A few are great. But the ones who stay in people's hearts are the ones who play with truth. You've got that," she smiled softly. "I still have a lot to learn." "Good," he said. "The moment you think you've learned everything, that's when the music stops teaching you." They laughed together. In that moment, she realized he wasn't just a legend, he was human. Kind, humble, and deeply connected to his art. Over the next few weeks, the tour took them from city to city, Detroit, Nashville, Atlanta, and beyond. Every performance was different, every crowd unique. She made mistakes sometimes, but she also had moments of pure magic. Her confidence grew, not from praise, but from the joy of expression. She began to see how music connected people. Strangers smiling, children dancing, couples holding hands. After each show, fans would come up to her, some with tears in their eyes, thanking her for playing from the heart. Those moments meant more to her than anything else. One evening, after a performance in Dallas, she and the famous musician sat outside the theater, watching the city lights. The night was calm and a soft breeze carried the smell of rain. "You ever wonder why we do it?" he asked quietly. "Play?" she said. He nodded. "Yeah, all the travel, the exhaustion, the endless rehearsals. What keeps us going?" She thought for a moment before answering. "Because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear it. Maybe they're sad or lost or lonely, and for a few minutes, our music helps them feel something good again." He smiled, clearly touched. "That's a beautiful answer. I think you're right." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant hum of the city. As the tour went on, she started writing her own songs during their travel days. Simple melodies at first, inspired by the people and places she'd seen. Sometimes she'd hum them softly on the bus and the others would listen. The famous musician encouraged her, saying, "Those songs will tell your story one day. Don't stop writing." One night near the end of the tour, he surprised her during a show. In the middle of their set, he turned to the audience and said, "We've got a new piece tonight. Written by our very own guest performer." Her heart jumped. She hadn't known he planned to share her song. The crowd applauded as he nodded for her to start. Her hands shook, but she lifted her trumpet anyway. The melody she played was one she'd written on a quiet bus ride. Gentle, heartfelt, full of memories of her father, the duel, and everything that had happened since. The audience listened quietly, completely still. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. She looked at the famous musician and he smiled proudly. After the show, he told her, "That song, that's who you are. Keep following that sound. It'll take you where you're meant to go." That night, as she lay in her hotel room, she felt something shift inside. She wasn't just a guest anymore. She was an artist finding her own path. And for the first time, she began to believe that her story, told through music, had only just begun. When the tour ended, it felt like waking up from a long, beautiful dream. The band had traveled across states, played for thousands, and shared laughter that echoed long after the shows were done. Every night had been different, but every night had felt alive. The young woman had learned more in those few months than she ever thought possible, about music, people, and herself. The final concert took place in Los Angeles. The crowd was massive, lights brighter than ever, and the energy electric. She played her heart out, every note a reflection of her journey. When the show ended, the applause seemed to go on forever. She stood on stage looking out at the sea of faces, unable to hold back her tears. The famous musician stepped forward, raised her hand, and said into the microphone, "Remember this face, everyone. She's the future of music." The audience roared, and she smiled through her tears. It was a moment she knew she would never forget. After the show, the band gathered for a small farewell dinner. There was laughter, stories, hugs, and a few quiet tears. Everyone promised to keep in touch, but deep down, she knew life would pull them in different directions. The musician sat across from her, his trumpet case beside his chair, looking thoughtful. "You've done something special," he told her softly, "but this is just the beginning. You've got your own path to follow now." She nodded. "I don't even know where to start." "Start where you always have," he said with a smile. "From the heart." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small golden pin shaped like a trumpet. "This was given to me when I started my first tour," he said. "Now I think it's time I pass it on." Her eyes widened as he pinned it onto her jacket. "I can't take this," she said. "Yes, you can," he replied. "It's not about luck. It's about remembering who you are." She couldn't find the words to thank him. The gesture meant more than anything she could express. When she returned home a few days later, the city felt quieter than she remembered. The streets, the cafes, the small park, everything was the same, yet she felt different. She wasn't the same shy girl who once played at local gatherings. She had grown, and though the stage lights were gone, the fire inside her still burned brightly. She started performing again at smaller venues. Crowds were larger now. People recognized her from the videos online. Some came just to hear her play the songs she'd written on tour. She always smiled and said yes, but she also made sure to play something new every time, something that told the story of who she was becoming. One evening, after finishing a performance at a downtown cafe, a man approached her. He was older, kind-faced, and carried a small camera around his neck. "I've been following your journey," he said. "Your music speaks to people. Have you ever thought about recording an album?" She blinked in surprise. "An album? I wouldn't even know where to begin," he smiled. "I run a small studio nearby. Nothing fancy, but it's got good sound. If you'd like, I could help you record something. Your story deserves to be heard." She hesitated. The idea of recording felt intimidating, but also exciting. "All right," she said finally. "Let's try." A week later, she stood in a dimly lit studio, headphones on, trumpet in hand. The smell of wood, wires, and faint echoes of old songs filled the air. The man behind the glass gave her a thumbs up. "Whenever you're ready," he said through the mic. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she played. The first track she recorded was the melody she had written on tour, the one that had brought people to tears. But this time it sounded different. There was maturity in her tone, a quiet strength that came from everything she had lived through. When the last note faded, there was silence in the room. The man's voice came through the speakers, soft and amazed. "That was perfect." She smiled, feeling her father's memory close by. Days turned into weeks as she poured herself into the album. Each song was a reflection of her life, her beginnings, her doubts, her joy, and her gratitude. She wanted people to feel something when they listened, the same way she felt when she played. When the album was finally finished, they released it online under a simple title, "From the Heart." At first, she didn't expect much. She thought only a few friends and local fans would listen. But within days, messages began flooding in from around the world. People from different countries wrote about how her music had touched them, how it reminded them of lost loved ones, how it helped them through lonely nights, how it inspired them to pick up their own instruments again. She read every message with tears in her eyes. She realized then that music truly had no borders. It didn't matter who you were or where you came from. A feeling could travel across oceans if it was honest enough. One night she received a call from the famous musician. His voice carried that same warmth she remembered from the tour. "I've been listening to your album," he said. "You did something beautiful. You found your voice, thank you," she said softly. "I couldn't have done it without your encouragement." He laughed gently. "You always had it in you. I just gave you a little push." There was a pause. Then he added, "I'm retiring soon. My hands aren't what they used to be." But knowing there are musicians like you out there makes me feel at peace. Promise me you'll keep playing no matter what." Her chest tightened. The thought of him retiring felt strange, like the closing of a chapter in her life. "I promise," she said. "Good," he replied. "Then I know the music's in safe hands." When the call ended, she sat quietly holding her trumpet close. She thought about everything he had taught her, not just about notes and rhythm, but about courage, humility, and heart. Months passed, and her career began to grow naturally. She was invited to play at festivals, on small tours, and even on radio shows, yet she never changed who she was. No matter how big the stage, she always carried that old trumpet, the one her father had left her. People often asked why she didn't buy a new one, and she always smiled and said, "Because this one still sings the truth." One evening, she returned to the same New Orleans festival where everything had started. The smell of street food, the hum of voices, and the rhythm of jazz filled the air again. She stood on the same small stage where she had once been challenged to a duel. Before playing, she looked at the crowd and said softly, "A few years ago, I played here for the first time. I was nervous, uncertain, and full of dreams. Tonight I'm here to say thank you, to this city, to the people who believed in me, and to the man who reminded me that music comes from the heart." Then she lifted her trumpet and began to play. Her sound was warm, deep, and full of life. It wasn't just music, it was her story, her journey, her soul in sound. People gathered just like before, drawn by the honesty of her tone. The applause at the end was thunderous, but she didn't play for that. She played because she loved it. When she finished, she looked up at the sky. The stars shimmered faintly above the stage lights. She whispered a quiet thank you, to her father, to her mentor, to every person who had listened and felt something real. As she walked off stage, a young girl ran up to her holding a small silver trumpet. "I want to play like you one day," the girl said shyly. The woman smiled and knelt down. "Then play what's in your heart," she said. "That's where the real music lives." The girl nodded, her eyes shining with the same spark that once lived in her own. And in that moment, she realized the circle was complete. What had started as a simple challenge in a small festival had grown into something much greater. A legacy of love, passion, and truth. She walked away that night not as the girl who once doubted herself, but as a musician who had found her purpose. Her story was no longer just about a duel or even about music. It was about finding strength in simplicity, courage in vulnerability, and beauty in being true. And though the applause faded behind her, her music, would live on in every note played by those she had inspired. The months after that night in New Orleans were full of quiet moments and long reflections. The young woman had played hundreds of shows by then, but that one felt different. It had brought her back to where it all began, to the same street where she had first stood with trembling hands and an old trumpet. Life had come full circle, and yet something inside her whispered that the journey wasn't over. Her days were no longer a blur of travel and sound checks. She had learned to slow down, to listen to silence as much as she listened to music. In the mornings, she often sat by her window with a cup of tea, watching the world go by outside, children heading to school, an old man feeding birds, the faint sound of a radio playing from a shop down the street. Life's music was everywhere if one listened carefully enough. One morning, as she sat there with her trumpet resting on her lap, she received an unexpected letter. It was written on old-fashioned paper, the kind that carried the scent of time. The handwriting was familiar, the elegant, looping strokes of the renowned musician who had once challenged her to that unforgettable duel. She opened it carefully, her hands trembling just slightly. The words were few, but they carried weight. He wrote that he was retiring for good. His health had declined faster than expected, and he no longer had the strength to perform. He had moved to a small house near the ocean, spending his days surrounded by quiet waves and memories. "I wanted to thank you," the letter read. "You reminded me what music really is, not perfection, not fame, but connection. Keep playing even when no one listens, especially then." There was no address, only a short postscript. "If you ever find your way to the sea, bring your trumpet." She held the letter against her chest, tears filling her eyes. She had always known this day would come, but the thought of him fading away from the stage left an ache in her heart. He wasn't just her mentor. He was the person who had helped her see her worth when she doubted herself the most. She made up her mind right then. She would find him. Not for a concert, not for the world, but for one last song. It took her a few weeks to track him down. Through old contacts, mutual friends, and messages passed quietly through the music community, she learned that he was living in a small coastal town in North Carolina. He rarely saw visitors, but she didn't care. She packed her trumpet, a few clothes, and her notebook and boarded a train heading east. The journey was long, but peaceful. She watched fields, forests, and small towns blur past the window, her thoughts filled with memories of the night of their duel, of the first applause she'd ever received, of the times he'd laughed during rehearsals and told her, "Don't think, just feel." When the train finally reached the coastal town, it was late afternoon. The air smelled of salt and pine. The ocean stretched wide and endless in the distance, glittering under the sun. She asked around for him quietly, and people nodded with recognition. "The old musician?" one woman said kindly. "He lives near the cliffs in a white cottage. Doesn't go out much now, but he still plays sometimes when the wind is right." She followed the winding path toward the cliffs, her heart beating faster with every step. The sound of waves grew louder, and the wind carried faint traces of music, soft, trembling notes of a trumpet, fragile but alive. When she reached the cottage, she stopped. There he was, sitting on a wooden chair by the porch, the sea behind him. His hair was grayer, his hands thinner, but his eyes still had that same spark. He looked up as she approached and smiled. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said softly. She smiled through her tears. "I got your letter. I hoped you would." He gestured toward the empty chair beside him. "Sit. It's good to have company." She sat beside him, setting her trumpet gently on her lap. For a moment they said nothing, just listened to the waves. It was peaceful, the kind of silence that only two musicians could truly understand. After a while, he spoke again. "Do you remember that day in New Orleans?" "How could I forget?" she said with a laugh. "You embarrassed me in front of a whole crowd," he chuckled. "No, you impressed them, and you impressed me. I saw something rare in you that day, and something pure." He looked out toward the sea, his gaze distant. "I've played all over the world, but that night reminded me why I started in the first place." She nodded quietly. "You changed my life. I just wanted to say thank you in person." He smiled. "Then play for me." Just once more, she hesitated. "Here?" "Right here," he said. "No stage, no crowd, just us and the ocean." She lifted her trumpet, feeling the cool breeze brush against her face. The sea roared below, the gulls circled above, and the sky stretched wide and clear. She closed her eyes and began to play. The sound carried across the waves, soft at first, then stronger, fuller. Every note told a story of where she came from, what she learned, and the man sitting beside her who had believed in her when no one else did. The music rose and fell like the tide, filling the air with something both sad and beautiful. When she finished, there were tears on his face. "That," he whispered, "is everything music should be." He took her hand gently. "Promise me one thing," he said. "When people listen to you play, don't let them just hear the notes. Let them hear the truth." She squeezed his hand. "I promise." They sat together until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The waves shimmered, and the wind carried the faint echo of their song. It felt like the world had paused for them, two souls bound by sound saying goodbye without words. A few weeks later, she received another letter. It was from one of his close friends. The musician had passed away peacefully in his sleep. For a long time, she couldn't bring herself to pick up the trumpet. Every note felt heavy, like it carried too much emotion to bear. She missed his laughter, his gentle teasing, his wisdom. But slowly, she realized that silence wasn't what he would have wanted. He had always told her to keep playing, especially when no one listens. So she began to play again. Not on stages at first, but in quiet places, in parks, in nursing homes, in small community halls. She played for people who needed music the most, those who couldn't afford tickets or didn't even know her name. Each time she played, she felt his spirit nearby, like a gentle guiding hand. And each time she finished a song, she whispered softly to the sky, "That was for you." Years passed, and her name became known across the country, not because of fame or glamour, but because of heart. People said that when she played, they could feel something, like a window opening to their own memories. Reporters asked her what made her music different, and she always answered with the same quiet smile. It's not about how well you play. It's about why you play. One evening, she stood backstage before a major concert, one of the biggest of her career. The hall was packed, the lights bright, the air filled with anticipation. She held her old trumpet close, running her fingers over the worn brass, and thought of the man by the sea. As she walked on stage, she took a deep breath. The crowd went silent. She raised the trumpet and began to play the same melody she had once played for him on that windy cliff. And as the final note hung in the air, she smiled. She knew he was listening. Somewhere beyond the waves, he was smiling too. The audience stood in applause, but she didn't bow for the fame or the glory. She bowed for gratitude, for the teacher who had shown her the meaning of music, for the father who had given her her first trumpet, and for every soul who had ever listened and felt something real. When she left the stage that night, she looked up at the stars and whispered, "You were right, it really does start from the heart." And as she walked away, the echo of her melody lingered, gentle, honest, eternal. The months after that concert felt calm, almost too calm. The young woman had spent years chasing notes, crowds, and applause, but now for the first time she felt a deep stillness inside her. Her life had become slower, quieter, yet somehow more meaningful. She no longer played to prove anything. She played to connect, to give something beautiful to whoever happened to listen. She didn't need large stages anymore. Sometimes she performed in small community centers, at children's schools, or even in hospitals. And each time she played, she poured her heart into it, just as her mentor had taught her. But deep down, she missed him. There were days when she'd pick up her trumpet and pause, waiting for his voice in the back of her mind saying, "Loosen your shoulders. Feel it, don't force it." Sometimes she swore she could almost hear him chuckle when she hit a wrong note. Those little memories kept her going. One spring morning, she woke up early and walked to the park near her home. The air was cool and the sun had just started to rise. She carried her trumpet with her as she always did. There was a bench by a small pond where she liked to sit and play for no one in particular. Birds would stop on the nearby branches and joggers would slow down to listen. It was her favorite way to begin the day. That morning, she began to play a tune she hadn't touched in years, the very first piece her father had taught her as a child. The melody was simple, warm, and full of memory. As the notes floated across the quiet park, she thought of her father's hands guiding hers, of the dusty little living room where it all began, and of the man by the sea who had reminded her why music mattered. When she finished, an old woman sitting nearby wiped her eyes and smiled. "That was beautiful," she said softly. "My husband used to play that song." "I haven't heard it in years," the young woman smiled gently. "It's one of the first I ever learned." "It always brings me peace," the woman nodded. "It brought me peace too. Thank you." Moments like that were what she lived for now. Quiet exchanges that had nothing to do with fame or applause. Just one heart speaking to another. As weeks passed, she began to feel a new kind of restlessness. Not the kind that made her chase the spotlight, but the kind that whispered she had more to share. Her mentor's words kept returning to her. "When people listen to you play, let them hear the truth." She realized she wanted to teach, to pass on everything she had learned about not just music, but about life itself. So she opened a small music school in her town. It wasn't grand or flashy, just a modest building with a few rooms, some chairs, and the soft hum of instruments filling the halls. Children came with wide eyes and nervous smiles, holding trumpets, violins, and guitars. Some wanted to be famous one day. Others just wanted to play for fun. She welcomed them all the same. On the first day of class, she stood before them, her trumpet gleaming in the morning light. "Music isn't about being perfect," she told them. "It's about being honest. It's about telling your story without words." Her students loved her gentle way of teaching. She never raised her voice or made them feel small. When someone made a mistake, she would laugh softly and say, "Good, that means you're trying." Over time, the school grew into a place of warmth and encouragement. People from all walks of life came to learn, and the sound of music filled the neighborhood every evening. One afternoon, as she was closing up the school, a boy approached her. He was shy, no more than 12, holding an old trumpet that looked almost too big for him. "I can't afford lessons," he said quietly, "but I really want to learn. I can do chores if that helps." She looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. Keep your money, she said. Come tomorrow. We'll start with breathing. The boy's face lit up with joy. He thanked her over and over before running off down the street. Watching him go, she felt a familiar warmth in her chest. It reminded her of when someone had once given her a chance, when she was the one standing uncertain, holding an old instrument, full of dreams she couldn't quite name. As the years passed, her little school became a haven for young musicians. Many of them went on to play in orchestras, bands, or local cafes. Some didn't pursue music at all, but they always said that what they learned from her stayed with them. Patience, kindness, and the courage to be genuine. Every now and then, she would take her students to perform at the park where she used to play alone. They would set up small chairs and she would tell them, "Don't worry about mistakes. Just feel the music. Let it move through you." And as the notes filled the air, people would gather, parents, children, strangers, all drawn by the sincerity of the sound. One evening, after a long day of teaching, she sat in her classroom alone. The sun had set, and the soft glow of the streetlights filtered through the window. Her trumpet rested on the table beside her. She ran her fingers over its worn surface, tracing the small dents and scratches that told the story of her journey. She thought about her father's hands, the New Orleans crowd, the man who had believed in her, and the boy with the old trumpet. It all felt like one long song, a melody that began long ago and still hadn't ended. She lifted the trumpet and played softly, just for herself. The sound filled the room tender and calm. It wasn't a song she had written nor one she had learned. It was something new, something that felt like home. As she played, a gentle breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the music out into the night. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a car passed, and life continued. But inside that little room, time seemed to stop. When she finished, she closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't clear who she was speaking to. Her father, her mentor, or perhaps to music itself, maybe all three. In the years that followed, her name quietly grew again, though she never chased it. People came from far away just to see her perform in small gatherings. Reporters sometimes asked her, "After everything you've achieved, what's the secret to your success?" She always gave the same answer, "There's no secret. Just listen and really listen to what your heart wants to say." Her students adored her, not because she was famous, but because she made them believe in themselves. To them, she wasn't a legend. She was someone who understood. One bright summer day, her students surprised her with something special. They had gathered in the school courtyard, holding their instruments. The boy she had taught for free years ago stood in front, now taller, confident, and smiling. "We wrote this for you," he said. "It's called The Heart Remembers." She stood there speechless as they began to play. The melody was gentle and familiar, blending fragments of songs she had once taught them, including her father's tune. Her eyes filled with tears as the music swelled, surrounding her with love, gratitude, and memory. When the final note faded, she clapped with trembling hands. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," she whispered. "It's your song," the boy said softly. "We just helped you finish it." She smiled through her tears. "Then promise me something," she said. "Keep playing, even when no one's listening." They nodded, understanding what she meant. That evening, after everyone had gone home, she walked to the park one last time. The sun was setting and the air was warm. She sat on her favorite bench, lifted her trumpet, and played The Heart Remembers. The sound floated across the pond, gentle and full of peace. She thought of every moment that had brought her here, the laughter, the struggles, the lessons, and the people who had touched her life. When the final note lingered, she smiled. She knew that somewhere, beyond the noise of the world, her mentor was listening, her father was smiling, and the universe was quiet enough to hear the song of her heart. She set the trumpet beside her and whispered, "The music never ends." And as the sky deepened into twilight, the wind carried her melody into the distance, soft, honest, eternal, a sound born from one simple truth, that real music, like love, never fades.